The topic, as you saw, we're going to be dealing with, finding halachic topics to deal with in Parshat Mishpatim is kind of like shooting fish in the barrel. So it shouldn't be that hard to discuss things, but I want to take different areas and discuss something which perhaps we wouldn't normally be thinking about. And so the topic that I chose is at the end of Rishon of the Parsha. Let me just bring up the screen. And I don't see it here. Hold on just 1 second. It's not in the... One second, it's not available here, which is odd. One second. Oh, this is wrong. Hold on just 1 second. I don't see why the screen isn't here. I'll talk while this is going on. Hold on just 1 second. I don't know what happened to the screen, to the file. So I'm going to have to just give me 1 second to get it to. It's, I apologize. The topic that we're going to be talking about, as I sent out in the other Makorot sheet while I'm waiting for it to come to my screen, the question of physicians, medical professionals in general, being able to charge for their care, we might think that it's kind of obvious that they should be able to. But it's not so obvious, as we're going to see in just 1 minute, as soon as I'm able to get it up here. I see what the problem was. The Torah tells us that Ki Yakum, this is the end of Sheni, while I'm waiting for the file to come up. The Im Yakum v'hitalech b'chutz al mishanto v'nikah hamakeh rak shifto yiten v'rapo yirapeh. The Torah discusses the issues that this is where the Torah talks about when a person wounds another individual, and the question is, what does that person, what kind of compensation has to be paid? So along the lines of also found in our Parsha of ayin tachat ayin, shen tachat shen, that you pay what's known as nezek, and you have to pay something which is the equivalent of that damage, or at least the monetary value of the damage that was rendered of the wounding of the person. So that's what's known as nezek. Here we go. Finally got the screen up. Okay, I hope that you can now see the screen itself. So here the Torah, and I'll make it a little bit larger so that people can see it. So the Torah here in the first source tells us that amongst the other issues that the person has to pay, if a person is able to get up and walk out on his cane, literally, so then the person who, the attacker in Makeh, is freed from the death penalty. However, he has to pay two, this is 2 of the 5 payments that we expect him to pay, namely shifto, shevet, which means the compensation for work lost during time of recuperation, as well as rapo ye rapeh. So the actual medical expenses are also included. Now, when you speak of that, medical expenses, so the Gemara, to jump to number 4 for a moment, the Gemara takes a drasha, Rabbi Ishmael, and learns a very important halacha, which perhaps is not as obvious as we would expect, namely, mikan shenitan rishut l'rofeh l'rapot. So the Torah here is telling us, and we're going to see different understandings of Rishonim as to what is the chidush here. But here the Torah gives us permission to the physician to heal. Why would we think that the Torah would not give that kind of permission? So there are different answers to this question. This is sort of by way of introduction. And we've spoken about this in the past. Back in the summer, we had a discussion about, from a philosophical perspective, different viewpoints on medicine and healing in the Torah, and I'll just mention a couple of them as we go along. I'm not going to reiterate that entire shiur, but here the Ibn Ezra says it quite nicely. The Rapo Yirapeh, or at least one perspective of it nicely. Rapo Yirapeh, La'ot Shinatam Reshut L'Rofim L'Rapeh Makot, V'Haptsaim Sheyiru Bachut. So he says explicitly, he limits it. The Torah gives permission to doctors to heal things that are seen bachutz, right? The fact that it is specifically, specifically that are external injuries. Rak kol choli shehumi bifnim beguf biyad Hashem lirafota. Here's the problem. In other words, why should we be allowed, or why should the Torah have to explicitly state that a doctor is allowed to heal his patient? The reason is because we should not allow human intervention. We should be quietists. We should accept the fact that God has perhaps punished this individual, and the healing is in God's hands, not in the physician's hands. And here the Ibn Ezra says that happens to be the case. This is not, and what we spoke about in the summer was, do we accept this at all from a halachic perspective? But we'll just and the answer is, for the most part, no. But I stress only for the most part, because there are those who disagree. But we'll leave that aside for the moment. The idea that the Ibn Ezra is saying is very important from a philosophical perspective. So he's saying that the Torah allows for a doctor to heal, but only to heal those external wounds that the Torah is speaking about within the context. Or again, remember the context being that a individual had harmed another person, and that person requires medical care to take care of the injuries. But if you're dealing with an illness, so then the Ibn Ezra says there is no permission for a physician to heal the patient. V'chein katuv. And so the Ibn Ezra says, I will bring sources from the Tanakh to prove my point. Hu yachiv v'yachvosh. He will cause pain, meaning God, and he will bandage the pain. The katuv ba'asa. And so similarly with regard to the Melech Asa, Gam b'cholyo lo dorash et Hashem. Even in his when he was ill, he did not call out to God. And we're speaking about his evil nature, meaning that that's what he should have done. Ibn Ezra says, but he didn't do that. Ki'im berofim, but rather he turned to the doctors, and that the Navi finds to be problematic. V'hinei katuv hifrish. Ki lo amar v'rafo yerofeh. Min habinyan hakal. So looking back at the pasuk, right, and we're going to see the Rabbeinu Bachai who explains the Ibn Ezra in a moment. But there is we're dealing with the nikud here of v'rapo yerafeh, right? That on there that you see the dots in the pay, right? That we're dealing with something which is to use the Ibn Ezra's formulation, kaved, right? Not the lowercase. And here that is the problem. And that indicates, according to the Ibn Ezra, that it is in effect coming against, as it were, not the normal route, but it's a sort of forcing God's hand, as it were. The Rabbeinu Bachai points this out, that he says, Kol refuah b'basar v'dam lo mitzano b'chol aktuvim ki'im b'dagesh. But when we speak of healing that's done by human hands, so it's always b'dagesh. It's always rapo, the pay. V'chen repa'enu et Bavel v'no nirfata. Aval b'hakadosh baruch hu matzinu b'rafa. When Kadosh Baruch Hu heals, so then it's not the hard pay, but the soft fe. Uhu shekatuv rifa'eni Hashem ve'erafeh. V'chtiv harofe l'shvurei lev. Erfa l'moshvatam. The etc. V'hatam bazen. He gives an explanation. Ki ha-refuah b'basar v'dam eina el yedei tsar v'toreach v'hu she'yispol hasam ha'mashke hamar. Medical healing, human healing, is something which is, so I guess, to a certain extent, this is a Western idea, right? That you are forcing the body, as it were, back into shape. Aval refuah shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'nachat. Ein sham tsar klal, ki birkat Hashem ta'ashir v'lo yosif etzev ima. So the idea is that God heals naturally, and that's why it's the softer refuah. Be that as it may, Masha amru rabotenu zichronam livracha v'rapo yerapeh mikan shenitna rishut la'rofeh l'rafot lo amru ela b'makash b'chutz shakatuv midaber ba aval cholim mibifnim ein ze talui biyad harofeh ela biyad harofeh kol basar. asher biado nefesh kol chai. So here you have the idea that the Ibn Ezra and Rabbeinu Bachai both say, and this is made more famous. I didn't bring it here. We'll see other statements of the Ramban. The Ramban has this idea as well, and the Ramban basically says that ideally we should never turn to the medical professionals. We should always be using our tefillot as our means of prayer, and the Ramban is very consistent in this. He uses this with regard to the avot as well. Now is not the time to get into the details because I really want to get into the halachic side of things, and we only have about an hour left. So that's one way of looking at it. One idea in terms of what is the chiddush that the Torah is telling us that a doctor is entitled to heal is v'rapo yirapeh. Why does the Torah have to tell us? Because I would think, normally speaking, that a doctor should not get involved, humans in general should not get involved in the health cycle, that we should leave that to God. The Torah tells us that we are allowed to turn to the doctor. There are those that we just saw who limit that to specifically to not only when the healing is being done through human agencies, but when the original injury was also an external injury. It wasn't something that was if you will, something that came naturally to the person or came from God. The distinction, by the way, I just want to throw out the idea. This is the distinction I find a little troubling, or namely, I don't understand it, because if you believe that God is punishing the person, so then presumably the wound that they received, the external injury, was also punishment. So why are we getting involved with that? Why does the Torah allow us to do it? And if you say, well, perhaps it's because you have a victim and you have a criminal, and the criminal had bechira chofshit in some way, and now we have to help the victim out. Well, why can't God help the victim out? And we don't even make the distinction between whether the injury, or they're not making the distinction between whether the injury was at human hands as part of a criminal act, where bechira chofshit would take place, or perhaps, if let's say, but rather based on whether it's an external injury or an internal illness. So if you're dealing with an external injury, let's say a person and sprains an ankle, right? Something relatively simple, that the doctor can patch up. But why? Well, perhaps God was involved with that as well. Why don't we let God heal it? But okay, we'll leave that aside for the moment. The basic idea is pretty clear, that the Torah would perhaps normally follow a quietist approach. We should accept whatever God decrees against us. We should pray to God for help, and anything else is tinkering with the system. That the Torah allows us to turn to medicine in these cases. So that's one approach as to why the Torah had to say v'rapo yirapeh. There are other approaches, and I'll point out two of them right now. One of them is actually, the second approach is the same as what we've seen until now. And just to show you the second answer of Tosfot, the question. Tosfot asks, Mikan nitna reshut l'rofei l'rafot, quoting the Gemara, Hikshe Harabenu Yaakov me Orleans. So Rav Yaakov, who came from Orleans, I guess in the English pronunciation, not New Orleans, but in Orleans in southern France, he asked, Shita, lama lo yirafu harofim, haktiv v'hashevot alo, v'darshino zo hashavat gufo, v'ktiv lo tamod al dam reach. So Rav Yaakov ben Orleans was a student of the Ri, So he asked the question, said he didn't phrase it from the philosophical side of things. He's phrased it from psukim. We have other psukim. So here back in source number 2 and source number 3, if you printed it out, number 3, I did not. This is I updated the sheet since after I sent it to the for printing. So these sources, one of them wasn't on the sheet at all, and one of them was in a different spot. We'll get to it in a moment, but I'll tell you what number is if you're looking at the sheet. If you take a look at number 3, im lo karov achicha elecha v'lo yidato. The context here in Parshat Ki Teitzei is a context of Hashavat Aveda, returning a lost object. And the Torah tells us if the person who lost the object is not around, lo yidato, you don't know who he is. So then you take the lost object into your home. So you should hold on to the object until your brother searches you out, and then return the object to him. That's the pasuk. Chazal were doresh on this, and I didn't bring the source inside, but basically Chazal were doresh HaShavua lo, you should return the object. Doesn't only apply to objects; it also applies to people. Meaning, if a person in himself is lost, he is in danger. So you have a mitzvah to return that person to herself, to himself. There's no greater object that a person can lose than their own life. So if you are able to help that person hold on to their life, so then that is part of the larger mitzvah, or of Hashavat Aveda, or if you will, it is the super category of Hashavat Aveda. That is the one limud that Tosfot is referring to here. Tosfot is also referring to a more direct limud, and that is a pasuk which we'll see in Sefer Vayikra and Parshat Kedoshim. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa ani Hashem. You should not stand on your brother's or your fellow's blood. And the lo ta'amod al dam re'echa is not only halachically but commonly understood, meaning that don't stand aside when someone else is in trouble, and we all have a responsibility to help the other when they are in danger in some way. So Rabbeinu Yaakov basically asked in Tosfot, I don't get it. Why does the Torah have to tell me the rapo yerapeh, that you should heal? Because after all, if you are going to, if we have these other psukim, so it's understood that a doctor has a responsibility to help a patient. The Tosfot, quoting him, the anonymous Tosfot, gives the same answer as what we've seen with the Ibn Ezra and Rabbeinu Bechai. This is the second bullet point. Li nireh d'cholaim haba'im machmat adam dinu sheyar pe'em aval cholaim haba'im me'atzmam ilav kra hava'amina she'en l'rafotam shenireh k'mevatel gezerat hamel. So that's the same idea. In other words, it had that it's a limiting factor, that they're taking the same idea, but taking one step further. Namely, according to Tosfot, it's not the Torah is expanding it. And had I only had lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, so then I would have been looking at this person saying, okay, if a person's drowning, so then I have to jump in and help them. But if we have a situation where a person has a strep throat, so should I give them? Should I first of all examine them, determine that it's strep throat and not a cold, prescribe antibiotics, etc.? No, that's God's issue. There's a disease, and of course, we're talking about before people had the modern theory of diseases in the first place. And you see someone with an inflamed throat, and we don't know what caused that because it's before there is a microscope, and so we're unaware of viruses, we're unaware of bacteria. So now given that circumstance, so we are assuming that the person has been struck down by God, but yet I have something which can help the person, some kind of medication. So should I give them the medication? So the answer is yes, because of Rapo Yerapeh, you have a mitzvah to heal. That is the idea, meaning that at least according to this, the Torah is rejecting the quietist approach entirely. That's the second answer of the Tosfot. However, the first answer is something else. Perhaps we would never have begun to think that we should adopt the quietist approach, and we should assume that we should always try to heal another person. That's lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. That's HaShavua. What difference does it make whether it's an external injury or not? So Rabbeinu Yaakov's answer was the following: Tiretz shenitan reshut l'refuah bischar. What is the chidush of the Torah? Chidush of the Torah isn't that you should heal the person, but that you have a mitzvah to heal, and you're allowed to take a compensation for your services. But normally speaking, we would assume that you can't take compensation. Why would I assume that you can't take compensation? We'll jump over number 10 right now. I'll just maybe we'll come back to it. Namely, for the following reason: there is a mitzvah. Number 12. Come to number 11 in just one moment. The Torah, the Gemara in Masechet Bechorot starts with a Mishnah. The Mishnah says the following: Hanotel scharo ladun. If you are looking at the printed sheet, by the way, so this is source number 11 on the printed sheet. I fiddled around with it a little bit. Number 12 on the screen, number 11 on the sheet that was sent out yesterday. The Mishnah says the following: Hanotel scharo ladun, dinav betelin. So if you take a salary, or you take some kind of compensation in order to be a judge, so then your rulings are nullified. Leha'id, if you take money in order to testify, eidotav betelin, so then the testimony is nullified, null and void. We don't accept testimony for which the witnesses were compensated for their testimony. Lahazot ulekadesh. So if a person takes money, a kohen takes money in order to sprinkle and to purify a person who is tamei met, who has become impure from contact with the dead, and the only way that they can become tahor is by being sprinkled with the ashes, the water mixed in with the ashes of the para aduma, of the red heifer. And a kohen has to do that. So now, if the kohen takes a compensation for his ritual service, so then meimav mei me'ara efro efer makle. So the water which needs to be from mayim chayim, it needs to be coming from a spring. So it's considered to be as though it came from a cave. In other words, it's tap water. It's not holy water. And the efer of the para aduma is as though it came from the hearth. You just basically went and you found some ashes and you mixed them in. And it's basically, there is no ritual value whatsoever if the kohen took compensation for his work. Now, the Mishnah continues, Im hayazaken, if the witness, the judge, the Kohen, were elderly and they're unable to come to where they need to go, markivo al chamor. So then the beneficiary of their services is allowed to give them, is allowed to provide transportation for them. He'll put him up on the donkey. V'noten lo scharo kipoel, and you can give a salary, you can give a compensation as a worker. Okay, so now there are two halachot that were stated here. Halacha number one is that taking any compensation for these services, dinav betelim. The din is batel. It is null and void, and we saw that it applies to testimony. We might have said, well, perhaps that's going to shape a person's testimony or shape their judgment, but it's hard to say that when it comes to the third case, which is a case of just simple ritual, and there again, it's also null and void. There seems to be a problem and a very deep problem in terms of taking compensation to do a mitzvah. That's really where the problem comes to. Having said that, we understand that people are deserving of some kind of compensation, and you can pay them not for the job of itself, but for the services that are rendered. Not for the services, but for their time that they spent, and you pay them as a worker, kipoel. Now, that's going to be very critical. The Gemara analyzes both of these ideas, namely the initial problem of taking compensation in order to do a mitzvah, and on the one hand, and the partial compensation. We're trying to define what that partial compensation is for a person who does a mitzvah. What is that person entitled to? What is the person not entitled to? And the Gemara continues, Minane mile. Where do I have this idea? Why should I think this is the case? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Amakra, Re'ei lamati etchem. Behold, God says, Moshe says to the people, I have taught you. Ma'ani bechinam, af atem bechinam. Moshe says, or the drasha is, see how I taught you. And now you have the obligation to teach your children. You have the obligation to teach others. So the Chazal understood this as saying, Moshe didn't get any compensation, didn't get any salary from God. And his job is Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, Moshe. So all people who teach are, in effect, continuing the chain that Moshe started. Just as Moshe didn't receive compensation, so too, you should not receive any compensation for teaching Torah. So minayin she'im lo matzah bechinam she'im yilmad b'schar. So now there are problems, right? This is really very fascinating when you think about it, or at least I find it fascinating, that the Gemara sets out a principle. It's forbidden for me to teach you Torah and to receive money. But let's say I'm not such a nice guy. And I say, I'm happy to teach you Torah if you pay me for my time. So you could say, well, listen, it's us, Rabbi, for you to charge. And since you're refusing, that's your problem. And I don't have to learn Torah because I don't have a person to teach me the Torah. Since I don't have someone to teach me the Torah, what does God expect me to do? And you go walk away. So the Gemara says, just because the teacher is not following the halacha and is insisting on some kind of compensation, so you have to pay the compensation because you have a responsibility to learn. Talmud Lomar, emet k'neh. So you should purchase, you should acquire truth. And we understand that there are times that in order to acquire something, you have to pay for that. Uminayin shelo yomar. So now we're in the next stage. I was the unscrupulous rabbi who was supposed to be teaching Torah for free, but I didn't do that for whatever the reason. You followed the halacha and you invested in your own education, or you invested in your child's education. And so now the recipient, the next generation, turns around and says, well, if I had to pay, so then I guess I can charge the next generation. Because if I had received it for free, then I would be like Moshe Rabbeinu. But I didn't receive it for free. I had to pay for it. I had to pay my tuition. So now I can charge tuition to my student. As the Gemara says, no, Talmud Lomar, emet k'nai v'al timkor. The Pasuk says it's true that you have to purchase it. You have to acquire it, and you have to be willing to spend money in order to acquire Torah, but al timkor. Don't sell it. That doesn't give you license to continue, if you will, this cycle of corruption. That's the idea of in terms of the Isser. Okay. Now the Gemara continues and says, okay, let's examine this a little bit further. Hazot. So, excuse me, So it basically invalidates what we were talking about. So now we have a contradiction. If I'm the Kohen and I want to use this water, it has value, right? After all, how much? Well, it's part of the expression. How much holy water is there, and how much holy water has the ashes of the Efer of the Paraduma mixed in? There isn't that much. It's a limited commodity, so it's going to be something expensive. And I use this to marry a woman. And I don't have a ring on me, but I do have a flask of Para Aduma water, and I say to her, Hareyat Mekudeshetli b'mayim elu. So if I do that, the kedushin works. Right? Afa pishu Yisrael. I happen to be a Kohen, but if I wasn't a Kohen and I had this Para Aduma water, so I could use it and it has monetary value, even though it's a mitzvah. So and it works in terms of kiddushin. So the Gemara says, Amar Bai lo kasha kam b'schar haba hava umilui kam b'schar hazah v'kiddush. There's a difference. If you get the sachar, if you're getting payment, there's a difference if it's in the preliminary stages in terms of filling it, in terms of the value of the water itself, as opposed to receiving compensation for the actual fulfillment of the mitzvah. The mitzvah isn't to have para aduma water. The mitzvah is to sprinkle the water. So it's usher to receive payment for the fulfillment of the mitzvah. It is permissible to receive payment for the preliminary stages, or for the, if you will, all of the activity around the mitzvah. So that's a very important ruling, which we'll perhaps talk about, or I'll just mention on the side because it's not really directly related to the question of the doctor. But basically, it means that if I am a person can receive payment, let's say, for the expenses that are necessary in order to provide for the school, not for the schooling, but for the school itself. In other words, if I need to make sure that I have maintenance of the building and I have to get the building and I want compensation for the building, and I have the upkeep, etc. And I even want to make perhaps a profit, so I could charge for the use of the facilities. I can't charge for the teaching of the Torah. Similarly, if we now go to the last part of the Mishnah, that the Mishnah said that even for the mitzvah itself, you can receive money as a poel. So the Gemara explains, what does it mean, kipoel? Kipoel batel means for the compensation for a poel for his being unemployed. We'll see what that means in a moment. Rabbi, kipoel batel shalota melacha. Poel batel is a subjective issue, and it means of a given action. Okay, that's the very cryptic statement on part of the Gemara. Rashi explains what that statement means. So, poel batel shalota melacha de batel hemena. You can receive compensation for lost work of the job that you would have done. And then Rashi says the following. I'm going to say it outside to save a little time. Basically, Rashi says that if you're dealing with a lucrative profession, which doesn't require a great deal of physical exertion, the example that he's using is a jeweler. Okay, but we might say an accountant, a lawyer, etc. And now you are told today you don't have to come into work. How much money do you value having a vacation day, a paid vacation day, but not a fully paid vacation day? You're given the choice. You will either be able to work and receive full payment, or you don't have to work and you will receive the compensation, the difference between taking the day off and having done your job. So Rashi wants to claim that if you're dealing with a person who has a profession that doesn't require a great deal of physical exertion, so then the compensation for the day off is minimal. So if you tell a jeweler, in his case, you don't have to come into work today, and you'll still be compensated for your time. So then, for argument's sake, he doesn't use numbers, but then let's say get 90% pay. So that is the poel batel for the jeweler. But if you're dealing with a person who has a more strenuous job, the example that Rashi gives here is a nagar, is a carpenter. So if you're dealing with a carpenter, right, who has a lot of, which is a much more strenuous profession than the nokev margoliot, the jeweler, the person literally who pierces pearls. So then that leave a larger percentage for poel batel, because basically what we're saying is that, well, if you told a manual laborer that he has the day off, so he's not only not having to come into the office, he also is able to rest up. He can stay in bed. He can relax and kick up his heels, as opposed to having to work diligently in the carpenter's shop. So the schar batala of the jeweler is higher because he would receive 90% of what he normally would get, whereas the schar batala of the nagar, of the carpenter, is lower because he would take 50%, let's say, to take the day off. This is still working at a time where people don't have a notion of paid vacation in the first place. But that is the idea that Rashi is saying. The question is, now this is where the problem is that, and getting back to that original line in Tosfot, Rishut Refuah Biskar, number 9 again, that basically healing another person is a mitzvah. Right? This is the Ramban number 10 that I skipped. But basically, this is Rishut the mitzvah, the mitzvah l'rafot u'b'klal pikuach nefesh. So the chiyuv is a blanket chiyuv to heal the other person, to do this. Is there a greater mitzvah than saving another person's? And that's exactly what the doctor is setting out to do, right? He's trying to heal the person. So that's pikuach nefesh. He has the chiyuv to do that. So if he has the chiyuv to do that, how can he charge anything for it? So the Torah comes and tells me, rapo yerapeh. Here you're allowed to charge. Now, does that mean you're allowed to charge anything you want? That's the question. Tosfot doesn't discuss it. Now, it's possible that the reason why the other Rishonim that we saw took a different tack as to why the Torah told us v'rapo yerapeh in the first place, and didn't take Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Orleans' idea that the Torah is telling us that it's permissible to take money, because they want to limit it. Whereas if you're basically, we have a rule: a person's not allowed to take money to do a mitzvah. Period. So you're not allowed to take money to do a mitzvah. You're not allowed to take money to teach Torah. You're not allowed to sprinkle para aduma water. You're not allowed to take money in order to heal another person. Okay. However, there are exceptions, or I shouldn't say exceptions. There are rules as to what compensation you can take. So you can take things that aren't directly related to the mitzvah, but are, if you will, the framework of that the mitzvah finds itself in. So then the doctor could charge for her office expenses, for the office workers, for the time that was necessary to, perhaps for the study time that was necessary. We'll see that that's a problem in a moment. But you can talk about all of the external expenses, and beyond expenses, you could take a profit for that as well. Since I went and I found myself this office, so I'm not going to only charge the patient for the rent of the building. I'm going to charge the patient for the service of finding the building, getting the equipment, etc., etc. That is that's legitimate based on the previous Gemara. And I can also charge the person for poel batel. I am both a carpenter, right? And I guess in the back in the day, 19th century, end of the 19th century, there wasn't that much difference between a surgeon and a carpenter, unfortunately. And thank God we live in a time that there's a major difference between them. So, okay, I'm a barber, and I also am a bloodletter. I do both. Okay, these are things that people did. So now I'm not doing my I'm not doing my work as a barber. So you'll pay me for what I would be happy to not have to cut people's hair. Okay, so whatever percentage will work out for that. So you can get compensation, for the healing. So you don't need a pasuk of Rapo Yerapeh to teach me that. We are within the rubric of all of the other mitzvot. So the other Rishonim go in different directions with the pasuk of Rapo Yerapeh. It seems from Rabbeinu Yaakov that by using the pasuk of Rapo Yerapeh to teach me that you can take compensation, that means that all bets are off, and now you can demand what is compensation for the medical care that you are providing. So that could be the machloket. Be that as it may, the Ramban in source number 14, the Ramban wrote a sefer called Torah Ha'adam. Torah Ha'adam, the Torah of man. This basically is a sefer which focuses on the halachot of the life cycle, especially the end of life cycle. Many of the Ramban organized the halachot dealing with a person and end of life issues, starting with refuah, with the healing, and then if God forbid the healing doesn't work, so then taking it from there to the halachot of burial and the halachot of avelut, called the Sefer Torah Ha'adam. Many of our halachot of Hilchot Avelut and the like, basically follow the Ramban's rulings at that time. But as part of this, as I said, he starts by talking about, on a more optimistic note, talking about the halachot of healing. And he speaks specifically with regard to medical issues and medical ethics. And one of the issues is with regard to compensation for a physician's treatments. Li'inyan schar refuah, nireh li d'mutar litol mehen schar batala v'tircha, aval schar halimud asur. So the Ramban draws the line. He says, listen, you can pay a person to compensate them for the time that they are taking off from their other job. They're the barber, and now they're not able to work as a barber because they're busy bloodletting. You can pay them as the barber. Tircha, there is work that's involved, meaning it is I could be doing other things, and there is I don't know, being a surgeon, especially if the person doesn't have anesthesia, that's not an easy work. So I deserve to, just for the sweat load of having to tie the person down and the like, I deserve to be compensated for that. Aval schar halimud asur. I can't include the expenses that I had to go to medical school. That I can't include. So now, why not? Because Avedat Gufohu, V'Rachmana Amar V'Hashavot Lo. This is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah of Hashavat Avedah. It's a mitzvah of Lo Ta'amod Al Dam Reyecha. The Ramban probably takes the Hashavot Lo and not Lo Ta'amod Al Dam Reyecha because it's a positive mitzvah. It's not only a Lo Ta'aseh not to stand aside, it's also a positive mitzvah in order to go save another person. I don't have the right to take compensation for that. And he compares the schar chokmah v'halimud asur dahabelei k'schar haza'ah v'kiddush. Learning the profession, he says, is not the equivalent of transporting the water of the para aduma that we spoke about before. Learning the profession is like the mitzvah itself. You're being mekayim a mitzvah in studying, and you're not allowed to take because you're preparing yourself to become a doctor, so you're not allowed to take compensation for that. Okay, that is, we'll skip down to the Shulchan Aruch for a moment, number 15. And the Shulchan Aruch just basically follows the Ramban straight down the road. Basically says, Rofei asur litol schar chokmah v'halimud. This is forbidden, but schar toreach v'batala mutar. But the tircha and the batala are mutar. So now we have a few questions, namely, okay, how do I define schar batala? What is considered schar batala? And to what extent do I have to pay if the doctor insists? Maybe now, we saw before that there was a mitzvah to pay who shouldn't have been charging me for his services when he taught me Torah, but I have to pay him anyway. He wants me to pay him, I have to pay him. So now, what about medical expenses? Do I have to pay the doctor? To the extent, Misha Yeshlo Simanim, continuing back to the Ramban. The Ramban talks about it to a certain extent, extortion, and of course, this can be and is used as a primary source to talk about price gouging. You have someone who's over the barrel. What is a fair price for medications? Can you charge an exorbitant fee for the medication? That's a sheer in of itself in terms of trying to define that. I'm just touching upon it because of the its relation to what we're discussing right now. But this is what the Ramban says: Mi sheyesh lo samanim v'chavero chole, v'chavero chole tzarich lehem. So I have the medications. I'm the pharmacist, and my fellow human being is ill and requires this medication. Asur lo la'alot b'dveihen yoter min ha'ra'ui. So it's forbidden to charge more than the going rate, right, or what is befitting. Of course, that hasn't been described to exactly what that means, how much that is, but we'll say that people have a sense. Below od elafilu paskalo b'dmeyen harbe mipnei hadocha kasha'a shelo matzu samin elo biyado ein lo elo dmei. So the Ramban says but let's say you're being extorted. It's all well and good to say that I have I'm not supposed to pay, but tell that to the pharmacist. So the pharmacist is saying, okay, but I have the only antibiotics in town. You want them? So I'll give them to you, and I'm going to charge you far beyond what they actually cost, and far beyond what would be a fair price in terms of compensation to the pharmacist, right? Drug companies, etc. Same issue. So I have to pay because otherwise, my child, God forbid, is going to die. So what am I going to do? So I pay. But I take it on credit. So then the Ramban says, Allah says, I don't have to pay the person. Once I have the money, so then I don't have to pay. And the Ramban brings a source for this. We're not going to go see the source inside, but the idea is that the case that the Gemara talks about, there are two cases, but the second case, I'm fleeing from I'm a refugee in a war, and I'm fleeing, and I need to cross the river. I have to, and there's a ferryman there, and the ferryman says, given the circumstances, what would normally be a 20 shekel fee, I'm going to charge you 2,000 shekel per person in your party because I understand you don't have a choice. So the Gemara says under those circumstances that you can say, okay, I'll pay you, and then when you get to the other side, not to pay. So presumably, if the ferryman has read the Gemara, so then he knows that he should take the money in advance. But leave that aside for the moment. What you see here is that you're allowed to lie, in effect, and any charge is considered to be an illegitimate charge, and you don't have to pay it. Of course, if you paid it, you didn't have the choice but to pay it. You do what you need to do, but legally, it was an illegal charge, an illegitimate charge. So now the same thing holds true, the Ramban says, with regard to medication. But then the Ramban says, at least with regard to the doctor, im hitne b'schar harofeh harbe chayav liten lo, shechochmato machar lo, ve'ein la damim. Because here, the Ramban says that you have a situation, this is really incredible when you think about it. Basically, the Ramban says here, the doctor is charging illegitimately. The doctor should not be charging for the services under these circumstances. However, a patient, if the doctor is asking for money, it's a legitimate charge because the doctor is giving a service which is priceless. And if he's saying, listen, I went to medical school and I spent 10 years of my life just going through medical school and internship and residency, not to mention all the post-residencies, and I'm giving you my services, which costs, that chokhmah is priceless, and I'm charging whatever I'm charging you. So then it's a legitimate payment. He shouldn't be doing it because there's a mitzvah for him to do it, and he shouldn't charge for his mitzvah. That's between him and God. But from a perspective of, if you will, from the transactional perspective, so it's a fair price. The Ramban doesn't feel the same way about the medication. Medication has a sticker price. The ferry has a charge that is listed on the ferry. All of these things have charges that are governed by the, if you will, by the market. But the price for life and the price of chokhmah, that's priceless. So it's true that much work has been done in the last 70 years or so, even maybe a little bit more, 80 years, as to try to give a monetary value, actuarial value to human life. But the Ramban is saying from a perspective of the value, the ultimate value, so then it is something which is priceless. So then any price that's charged for the services is a legitimate price. So the Ramban is playing it on both sides. It's really a really fascinating idea that the Ramban is saying. And the Ramban says that if you are, as a result, if you are paying the fee for the doctor, so then it's understood when the doctor tells you, you're accepting that willingly, and you cannot escape having to pay that legally. If the doctor were to take you to court in order to get his fee, so the lost fees, so the court the Ramban said, would rule in the doctor's favor, even if the court would be telling the doctor you shouldn't be charging people anything, or certainly not beyond skar batala. So then, nevertheless, the doctor would win in the court case. So it's a really very interesting idea that the Ramban is putting forward. Having said that, so how do I define what is an appropriate fee? Or the Ramban says that even if it's an inappropriate fee, you have the right to do that. Okay, but I'm the doctor who wants to keep Torah mitzvot. I want to charge on the one hand, something which is a fair fee, and which a fee which the Torah allows me to charge, and yet I want to make sure that I'm able to provide for my family. And how do I define skar batala? Especially if I don't have another profession. As I said before, that surgeons in the Middle Ages, so they were also barbers. They were also providing other services. Today, a surgeon is a surgeon. That's his only profession, her only profession. And if you're going to go to her and you're going to say to her, well, as a barber, you could have gotten, X amount per hour. So that's what I'll pay you, right? And I'll even pay you 95% of what every barber gets per hour, right? So you're not going to get very far with that in terms of paying the surgeon. So is that legitimate? How do we perhaps also, since we are all beneficiaries here in Israel of, we'll say, so-called socialized medicine, right? So is there, if you're talking about something like sharap, if you're talking about extra fees for private service, is that something which is legitimate? Or do you say that, okay, we'll pay for it because, as the Ramban said, I'm paying something to the doctor or to the medical facility, I'm paying them for what is it's a legitimate charge, even though it's really usher for them to ask me the money. But now if I am the physician, is it permissible for me to charge a fee for private care, or do I only have to work for the kupa? And so this is really the question. So so this goes back already in a very brief comment to to the 13th century. The Rush in the quoted by his son in the tour says it's a tshuva of the Rush, but I just have the one line here in the tour for the moment. Katav Adoni Avi Harash, number 17. If you are looking in the printed sheet, so then it's not number 17, it's number 16. So the tour says the following. Shenahagu ha'idana l'lamed hakol b'schar. So the here, this isn't referring to a doctor, it's referring to a teacher. So we already saw that a person isn't allowed to charge, but yet if someone was unscrupulous and asked for money, so I have to pay them to teach my children. So now, does that mean that every teacher is being over an isur when he charges money for his services? So he says the following: Ein lo b'meli parnes shari. So if this is their only profession, so then it's permissible. But even if he has another profession, so if his education is his only profession, so then he can charge for his services. If he has another profession, so he's a teacher on the side, he's a computer programmer, and he wants to teach Torah as well. So then, can he charge money for now? So then, we can look at it and say, okay, you know what he could charge? He could charge the schar batala for the computer programming. If he is, which is going to be far higher than than what an educator gets. So if he is, for argument's sake, is able to get 200 shekel an hour, probably more, but let's say 200 shekel an hour for being a computer programmer, schar batala for a computer programmer might be 150 shekel per hour. So he's entitled to ask for 150 shekel per hour for teaching Torah. Okay, that would be the formulation of the Rush. But the second idea is less important to me. The first part, where the Rush doesn't seem to make any distinction, and he doesn't have a source for this. It's his svara that's saying it, that that he can he's allowed to a salary, a fair salary, if this is his only profession. And it seems to be something which is, as I said, the Rush doesn't bring a source, but perhaps we should ask what the source is, or perhaps the source is that it's common sense. That second idea that it's common sense actually comes up from a tshuva of Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe, it's a tshuva late in his life. That's why I brought the date. And so the tshuvot that are late in his life, we have to realize they are brought to us with a filter. And the filter is acknowledged, and is, there is no there's no and it's acknowledged explicitly by Rav Moshe himself. Here's the tshuva. It's from 1985. Rav Moshe passed away less than a year later in 1986, in Adar of 1986, and this is in Nisan of 1985. So and so Rav Moshe was already 90 years old, and when he's writing this, and he wasn't in the best of health. So he says the following. The question is, "B'tam mashe mutar l'rofei litol yoter mischar batala." And so already by the title of the tshuva that he puts in, that it is permissible for it's not a question of is it permissible. It's clear from the line that it is permissible. Mashe mutar l'rofei. What is permissible for the physician, litol yoter mischar batala, to take more than what is the schar batala, but to take a real salary for his work. So he's going to explain why this is the case, as not whether this is the case. It's clear that it is. So he says, Hinei nechti harav agon moreinu rabbeinu Mordechai Tendler shlita masarli pirtei shelatecha. So he's already saying, I received the question through the filter of my grandson. Umachmat shekasheli ka'et lichtov. And it is difficult for me to write. Bikashti shiatiku tshuva zo b'mechonat ktiva. So I have asked that I'm going to take a dictation, or not, he's not going to take dictation, he's going to dictate, and someone is going to be typing this tshuva. Just to, and I kept the print here to allow you to see the intellectual integrity that was taken by the family when they published these tshuvot, that they differentiated in the font between the actual words of Rav Moshe and what they have added from an editorial perspective. So what's in the italics is the editorial perspective. What's in the regular print is Rav Moshe's words, and the underlining and the highlighting, that's mine. So he says the following: So he chides the questioner from the beginning, because he's saying that, you are asking a question when you know full well that this is the common practice, right? We're 1985 in New York City, so people are paying full dollar for medical services, and nobody is questioning the practice. So the questioner, who wrote apparently a lengthy letter to Rav Moshe explaining all the problems that he had with the practice and some proposed solutions and limitations to what doctors could charge. So Rav Moshe is saying, listen, you have to realize that whatever you're saying might be interesting, but it's only interesting. It's not going to affect the halacha, because this is what is noheg ba'olam, and people have been doing this for not time immemorial, but for dozens and scores of years already. So this is what's happening. But since it's clear that you had major doubts about this, there is one shtuch after the other in this line. I went, I skimmed over what you wrote. So you questioned, how could doctors take more than what is fair sachar batala for their services for the healing of Jews? It didn't bother him about the healing of non-Jews, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. This goes against what the Shulchan Aruch that we read before says. So then there is a few paragraphs which I have taken out where he disagrees with certain issues, but he says the following: So there is an idea here. Again, what was the question? The question is, okay, skar batala. But if the person has another profession, I can try to calculate what skar batala is. But if he doesn't have another profession, how can I do that? So you're going to say, okay, he could have been a doctor, he could have gone to law school. So I'll take a look at what lawyers earn and have skar batala of lawyers. But that doesn't work, because right? I know that he's a successful surgeon, but do I know that he would have been a successful Wall Street lawyer? I don't know that. And maybe if he had decided not to go into surgery, maybe he would have gone into a far less lucrative field. So I don't have what to calculate this with. Right? So then he says, Gam Sha'ar, there's one shtoch after the other. So here's another one. We're going to go, because we started a little bit late, so we're going to another 5 minutes. Gam Sha'ar Chakirotecha Mevusasot Al Hayesod Sheyesh Lagdir Lagbil HaRofeh Dafka L'Schar Batala. So your basic premise is that whatever you're going to pay the doctor, you should be paying the doctor based on this concept of Schar Batala, the compensation for lost time. So I don't have to go into the rest of your discussion. And this is, again, it's not just a shtach. It's not just that Moshe is needling him, but he's making a very important statement here that the whole perception that you are working with, that based on the Shulchan Aruch, based on the Gemara, that we should be faced with this idea limiting a doctor to Schar Batala, and now I have to say, well, perhaps we can reinterpret what Schar Batala is for the end of the 20th century, so that Rav Moshe says you are barking up the wrong tree. You are looking at this from the wrong perspective. It's the perspective that the truth is what we would all normally have said, because that seems to be the perspective of close to 1,700 years of halachic literature. But Rav Moshe, in half a sentence, is rejecting the very concept. So why does he do that? He says, Hatam hanachon hatir l'rofe litol yoter me'asher tzkar batala. U'l'maaseh yadua shahayehudim yoter merutzim tipulam shel rofim Yehudim. So I left it in. I could have edited a little bit to make it a little more politically correct. But basically, it doesn't matter in terms of the idea here. But basically, Moshe is the patient wants this doctor. If you're the only doctor in town, so then you could go back to the Gemara. There's only one doctor in this small country doctor. So then maybe you could talk about Schar Batala, but maybe not even according to Moshe. But certainly, when you're in a situation where you could go to another doctor, but you want this doctor. So here he's saying it, based on, well, we know that all the good doctors are the Jewish doctor, but it doesn't really matter what the reason why I want this doctor. You want this doctor, and you know that this is what he charges for his services. Ein echad shemuchan litroch ulahotzi hotzaot hanidrashot liot rofeh bli sheyeda sheyeh mutar lo lekabel schar kazeh shenotnim. So now Rav Moshe says that it's not just a question of, well, I'm offering you something that that I already have, and so you say, okay, you're right, I want you because you are the best. You're the best doctor, but you have a mitzvah to give me your services at a discount. So the doctor can look at me and say, you don't understand. I only went into this profession. I'm not a barber. I am not a carpenter who happens to be able to handle the hacksaw when I'm amputating a limb. I am an incredibly highly trained professional who had to sacrifice years and years of my life in order to learn my profession. And the only reason I went into the profession, I shouldn't say the only reason, because I went into it because it's a profession of Gmilut Chasadim. But the only reason I chose this profession of Gmilut Chasadim as opposed to some other profession is because I'm willing to make that sacrifice of all the years of training and all of those hours as a resident, etc., is because there's also fair compensation at the end of the day. And the compensation isn't that of Schar Batala. So basically, what Rav Moshe is saying, and I think this is what the Rush was saying some 700 years before Rav Moshe, is that the idea of the Schar Batala is based on a specific socioeconomic model which maybe existed when it comes to refuah for most of human history. But the moment that socioeconomic model doesn't exist anymore, the idea of Schar Batala also goes out the window. And then the fair payment of the new system, it doesn't allow the doctor to gouge prices, but it does allow the doctor to get what the society views as fair compensation for his or her labor. That is not a problem. That goes back again, maybe to what Rabbeinu Yaakov, to that first Tosfot that we were learning of saying, Rapo Yirapeh, that the Torah is saying that there's a mitzvah l'rapot and to receive compensation for it. So then it becomes a question of within what parameters, but the parameters are based on the socioeconomic setting that you find yourself in. So this is really a really fascinating type of idea. And then he continues, he said, V'gam ta'an nechdi anal, so my grandson, Mordechai Tendler, also said, Efshar she'etzem adin ma'iri rak b'bi sheyesh lo parnasa acheret. Right, so you don't have to go as far as Rav Moshe is saying that it's to say that it's a different socioeconomic makeup that is at play here, but rather even Gemara's makeup of Schar Batala assume that a person has some other profession that he or she can fall back on, and then we use that other profession as our yardstick. But in today's society, where the professionals choose one profession and there aren't other professions to fall back on for that person unless they're retrained to do something else, so then the rules of Schar Batala don't apply. Rav Moshe accepts that idea, but that's not his major idea. His major idea is that the whole concept of not receiving compensation for a mitzvah is based on a certain socioeconomic structure that exists or existed at a certain time, but that socioeconomic system is subject to change. And when it changes, so then the person who's being mekayem the mitzvah has the right to charge a fair amount based on the socioeconomic system that they and society that they live in to that day. So it's so with this we'll close. The Rapo Yirapeh begins with a mitzvah, with the heter, that to do something which perhaps I would have known you're allowed to do in the first place. But the idea but it has a tremendous amount of ramifications. It has ramifications with regard to perhaps overturning a quietist approach, the beginning of what we were speaking about, that the same Ramban who says that really we should turn to God for our salvation and for our healing, and we shouldn't be able to we shouldn't need to go to doctors, turns it into a mitzvah that that because of pikuach nefesh, because of Rapo Yirapeh, and the question of payment also focused on Rapo Yirapeh, but we see that you're allowed to charge, and you're allowed to charge a fair amount based on the different socioeconomic models that might exist, because the Torah doesn't want to do mitzvot for a fee, but the Torah also expects you to make the appropriate sacrifices in order to be able to do the mitzvah in the first place. So with that, we'll finish. I'll stop the share, and if anyone has questions, I saw there was a hand up, so I'll take the question.